Good afternoon. The world has changed an awful lot in the last couple of years, hasn't it? It's hard to think back to what life was like before the middle of March of 2020 when the COVID pandemic began. It's as though there's a sharp line that is drawn and we talk about life before COVID and life since COVID. As the pandemic is starting to ease, there are some aspects of pre-COVID life that are coming back. But I imagine there are some things from the past that will never return. And I imagine there are some changes that we've gone through that are now permanent. Think back over the past couple of years and the tremendous impact that COVID has had on our world. First, of course, are the people who have died. There are almost 1 million confirmed COVID deaths in the United States. And every single one of those deaths leaves behind a circle of family and friends who now have an empty space in their lives. Then we can think of the people who've contracted COVID. Now, for many of us, we had mild or no symptoms at all. But there are a lot of people who are now referred to as the long haulers, for whom the symptoms of COVID are remaining for months or even a year afterward. They continue to struggle with fatigue and memory issues and so many other effects from COVID. Then we can go on to think of the first responders and the hospital staff and the many other healthcare workers and the staggering toll that the pandemic has had on them. There are many other effects that COVID has had upon us that are beyond these immediate things. The economy of the entire world has tanked. There's now a shortage of workers. We see how the supply chain has been broken. We're only starting to see how this has affected children's education. We see the effects of social isolation that people have had. Mental health issues are on the rise. They even talk about what is called the COVID-15, people's weight gain during the pandemic. No, COVID has impacted our lives and our world in so many ways that are far beyond what we could have even imagined. And all of this happened because of one small bug. One tiny little speck that's barely visible with a microscope. Now, there's still controversy over where this little bug came from, but it was just one tiny scrap of DNA. And it multiplied, and it spread over the world, and it changed life profoundly for the entire human race. It's changed many things, probably forever. And it all came from that one tiny little bug. Who could imagine that something so small could do so much? Who could imagine something small could do so much? Well, Jesus could imagine it. He talked about it. He said that God's kingdom is like a mustard seed, and a mustard seed is about the size of a piece of sand. But he said that this mustard seed becomes a bush that is large enough for birds to nest in. Or, Jesus said, God's kingdom is like yeast, that tiny little pinch that you put into a big batch of dough, and it makes the whole thing rise. God's work in our world and in our lives often happens in small, almost unnoticeable ways. But over time, it transforms who we are, and it makes the world a different place. Jesus also compared our faith to a mustard seed. Again, a mustard seed is a tiny little thing. To have faith like a mustard seed is meaning you don't have hardly any faith at all. It's easy to overlook your faith or ignore it, or to think that you don't have any faith at all. But Jesus said, if you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it will move. Nothing will be impossible for you. So you may wonder, when you look at the problems in the world, or when you look at the challenges you're facing personally, you may ask, how could I ever make a difference? I'm just one person. I can't do much. Or Maybe you think about the level of faith that you have in God. You might look at other people around you, perhaps other church members, and you don't think that your devotion to God comes even close to theirs. And it's easy for you to become discouraged and think, well, I'll never measure up. When you think these things, remember what Jesus said. You only need a speck of faith, just the tiniest little bit. You don't have to be a hero of the faith. You don't need to be a champion of prayer and mission work. You just need a tiny little bit of faith. And you know what? You can move mountains, and nothing will be impossible for you. And if you wonder, well, how could that ever happen? Then just think back to that one tiny little bug that we call COVID-19. Think of how it has changed our world. Jesus said, you can do the same thing. Would you pray with me, please? Lord, increase our faith, but take even the smallest faith that we have and do your wonderful work through it. Use us, Lord. Use us to change the world, as small and as insignificant as we may feel. Help us to remember that you do mighty things from small, tiny things. Amen. Thanks for joining me. We'll talk again later.